At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. If there was one first impression that every sapient species shared, it was that humans looked too weak. They were conducting the first assessment of a human volunteer, a traditional event that happened every time a species joined the galactic stage, when lead Dr. Vosix spoke for the first time. Has everyone connected their implants? Vosix's voice carried across the sterile examination chamber, his green-scaled hand gesturing toward the augmented reality interface that shimmered in the very air before him. He was a reptile of relatively modest stature, distinguished by his short snout and the notable absence of a tail, a genetic quirk that ran in his family line. The white medical coat he wore was entirely unnecessary given the climate-controlled environment, but he had always felt it lent a certain gravitas to these proceedings. Old habits from his early career days, perhaps, or maybe just vanity. Do you all have access to the augmented reality overlay? He continued, adjusting the collar of his coat as he surveyed the assembled medical professionals. Every single eye and equivalent visual appendage in the room, some mounted on stalks, others hanging from antennae, a few that seemed to float independently in ways that still made Vosix vaguely uncomfortable, turned as one toward the subject standing behind the reinforced glass barrier. The human stood there in what the briefing materials had called his natural state, which apparently meant wearing nothing but a pair of what the translator rendered as socks. The volunteer had been convinced to undergo this examination for a couple thousand credits, bound by a confidentiality clause, and reassured repeatedly that only medical professionals would be involved in the assessment. Vosix noticed a gray-feathered Zibbit doctor turning his full attention to the subject, his head cocking at an angle that would have been impossible for most vertebrates. The Zibbit's feathers ruffled as he examined the human with what Vosix recognized as skepticism. Initial visual inspection, the Zibbit began, seems to suggest that humans might be the weakest creatures we have ever found worthy of study. He paused, letting that assessment sink in before continuing. Note the complete lack of claws, sharp talons, venom sacs, or even moderately developed fangs. The dental structure appears designed for omnivorous consumption rather than combat. The dermis shows no evidence of scales, chitinous plating, or even particularly thick fur for protection. The Zibbit's wing arms gestured toward the human behind the glass. From a purely biological perspective, I would tentatively mark humans as possibly the most harmless species we have encountered. There are domesticated livestock on several worlds that present more obvious physical threats. Vosix found himself nodding, slowly, though something in his scientific mind urged caution. An interesting preliminary observation, Doctor. He trailed off deliberately, waiting for Zibbit to provide his credentials. Krelix, lead researcher of xenoevolution of the Vorge Academy. The Zibbit responded with obvious pride. And I should clarify that this is merely an initial assumption based on visual data. But I must say, it is somewhat undeniable that from a purely observational standpoint, humans present as fragile. Vosix was grateful that the glass barrier was equipped with sound-dampening technology. The human couldn't hear this preliminary discussion. He watched as every head, sensor array, and optical organ in the room swiveled toward Krelix, hanging on his professional assessment. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled doctors. A large being near the back, whose species Vosix didn't immediately recognize, spoke up in a powerful voice. Those soft nails don't even qualify as claws. I've seen hatchlings with more formidable natural weapons. Another voice, this one belonging to a gelatinous creature whose words somehow formed in the air around it, added, The muscle structure doesn't look horrible, admittedly. There's some definition there, particularly in the limbs, but it's far from impressive when you consider the baseline. My own species has twice the muscle density, and we are considered rather average in terms of physical prowess. Vosix raised a scaled hand to quiet the growing discussion.
Fascinating observations, all. But I think it's time we move beyond surface-level assessment. Let us see what lies beneath. He gestured toward the control panel. Activate your augmented reality overlays, everyone. Let's examine the human's internal systems. A chorus of acknowledgments filled the room. Nods, clicks, chimes, and various other species-specific affirmatives. Krelix's feathers smoothed down as he focused, his eyes taking on the glaze that indicated his implant was fully engaged. Moments later, Vozix found himself looking at the human volunteer, yet he was no longer seeing the pale exterior flesh. Instead, his enhanced vision displayed the internal organs in brilliant, color-coded detail. The nervous system was highlighted inside him. The bone structure glowed in shades of calcium white, standing in stark relief against the softer tissues. The cardiovascular system mapped itself in reds and purples, showing the intricate network of vessels that kept this creature alive. Vozix noticed a few unusual things right away. His eyes lingered on certain structures, measurements appearing in his peripheral vision as his implant calculated volumes and densities, but he didn't point out his observations immediately. One of the first lessons he had learned as a lead researcher was to let others arrive at discoveries on their own when possible. It made for better science and better teaching moments. He waited, watching the other doctors as they examined the internal systems, waiting to see if anyone else would notice what had caught his attention. It was exactly at that moment that what he assumed to be a new doctor, one who was apparently late, entered the room. Vozix turned, recognizing her immediately as a Neri, one of the green-skinned peoples from the Prior cluster. She had the characteristic silver eyelashes, and her skin was adorned with the colorful spots that indicated, if Vozix remembered his xenobiology correctly, emotional state and social status among her kind. Currently, they swirled in patterns of curious orange and excited yellow. She had apparently bypassed the preliminary briefing entirely because she walked directly toward the viewing window, her eyes widening as she took in the scene before her. Vozix and the other doctors simply watched in silence as she stared at the human volunteer. Then, in what Vozix assumed was meant to be a technical observation delivered with professional detachment, she pointed at the glass and spoke after exactly 2 seconds of observation. "Why is it so large?" The question lingered in the air, simple and direct. Vozix felt his mind immediately jumping to what he had assumed she must be referencing, the same unusual feature he had noticed moments ago. Finally, someone else had seen it. This was the perfect teaching opportunity. "Excellent observation." Vozix stepped forward, his excitement overriding his usual professional reserve. "I noticed the same anomaly the moment the overlay activated. If you'll all direct your attention to the digestive system." He used his personal interface to highlight the relevant structures, causing them to glow more brightly in everyone's augmented vision. "You'll notice something quite remarkable." He began walking along the length of the glass, following the path of the human's digestive tract with his finger. "The digestive system is exceptionally large for a creature of this size, but more importantly, look at the chemical complexity we're detecting. The stomach alone produces 6 different types of digestive enzymes, and the intestinal system, both the small and large segments, shows an almost unprecedented level of adaptability." Vozix's enthusiasm grew as he continued his explanation. "This is a clear indication of a species that evolved to consume a remarkably large range of foods. The system can process plant matter, animal proteins, various carbohydrates, and even shows evidence of being able to adapt to novel nutrients. In my 30 years of xenobiology, I have never seen such a versatile digestive system. They might be capable of eating a wider variety of foods than any species we've studied before. The implications for their evolutionary history are fascinating. It suggests a background of environmental uncertainty, where dietary flexibility was a crucial survival trait." He turned back to face the room, expecting to see expressions of scientific wonder. Instead, he found Krelix's head tilted at an even more extreme angle, his feathers ruffling in what Vozix had learned to recognize as avian confusion. "A compelling analysis, lead doctor," Krelix said slowly, his melodious voice careful. "However, I don't believe our Neri colleague here was referring to the digestive system when she asked why it was so large." Krelix turned to face the Neri woman directly, his wing arms folding in front of him in a gesture of academic inquiry. "I believe you were commenting on the skeletal structure, yes? Specifically, the density and size of the long bones in the arms and legs." Without waiting for her to respond, Krelix launched into his own explanation, stepping closer to the glass, his wing arm extended, pointing toward the glowing bone structure visible through their overlays. "I'll admit, I may have been premature in my initial assessment of humans as weak. Look at these bones, particularly in the legs. The femur, tibia, and fibula show a density rating that's approximately 40% higher than what I would consider standard for a biped of his mass." He gestured toward his own body with his other wing arm. "My own species, the zibit, have hollow bones, an evolutionary adaptation for our semi-aerial lifestyle. Most avian species across the galaxy share similar traits. But these human bones are incredibly solid, dense, and by the calculations I'm seeing, capable of withstanding enormous amounts of stress." Krelix's head swiveled back to address the full assembly. "A species with bone structure this robust cannot be classified as weak, regardless of their lack of natural weapons. These bones could deliver devastating blunt force, support considerable muscle mass, and absorb impacts that would shatter my own skeletal system. I may need to revise my entire initial assessment." Vozix felt a flash of irritation. His digestive system observation was obviously more scientifically significant than bone density measurements. Bone density was interesting, certainly, but evolutionary dietary adaptation told you so much more about a species' history, survival strategies, and potential future development. He turned to the Neri doctor, determined to settle this academic disagreement definitively. "Perhaps you could clarify for us, doctor." He paused, realizing he hadn't called her name. "What exactly were you referring to when you asked why it was so large, and which system are you currently examining in your overlay?" The Neri woman touched her head with one delicate green hand, her silver eyelashes fluttering in a way that seemed almost theatrical. Then she began to laugh, a sound like tinkling bells that somehow managed to convey both amusement and confusion. "What do you mean by overlay?" she asked between giggles. Every doctor in the room turned to look at her. The silence that followed was so complete that Vozix could hear the ambient noise of the space station's environmental systems through the walls. Vozix felt his professional composure slipping. "The augmented reality overlay," he explained, speaking slowly as if to a student. "The medical visualization system we're all currently using to examine the human's internal biology. You must have missed the preliminary briefing. You arrived late. You need to connect your medical implant to the system." He brought up a holographic interface and quickly located the visitor manifest. "You should be able to use your medical license credentials to connect. Just sync your implant with the examination chamber's network, and you'll have access to all the same data we're seeing." The Neri woman's laugh died away, replaced by an expression that Vozix's translator interpreted as acute embarrassment mixed with existential horror. Her skin spots shifted rapidly through colors Vozix had never seen a Neri display before, deep purples and browns that suggested profound discomfort. I am a..." She touched her head again. Then her spots shifted to what could only be described as mortified magenta. "I came here for the cultural exposition." The words landed like a small explosive device in the center of the room. "The... what?" Vozix heard himself say. "The cultural exposition," she repeated, her voice growing smaller and weaker with each word. "The one about first contact protocols and artistic representations of alien species. I thought this was some kind of
live art display. Like performance art. I saw people gathering, then looking through glass at a naked subject, and I just assumed.
She took a slow step backward toward the door.
So, you're all serious doctors, and no one is doing nude paintings here.
Another step back.
I guess I should leave and find the actual cultural exposition venue.
The surprise spread through the assembled doctors like a wave. Vosix could see it in every form of body language represented: stiffening exoskeletons, flattening feathers, color changes, chemical signals, and various other species-specific indicators of shock. Each of them was fully aware of what this meant. She shouldn't be here. This had been a private evaluation, bound by agreement with this human individual and with humanity as a whole. A strict confidentiality clause had been signed. Only certified medical professionals with proper clearances were supposed to be present. This was a security failure, and a potentially catastrophic one. Vosix thought for a brief moment whether it would be possible to pretend this never happened, to not inform the human that someone unauthorized had been present, to just let her slip away and hope no one mentioned it. He gave up on the idea within seconds. There were at least 20 doctors here, all of them acutely aware that a violation had occurred. Each of them had professional and ethical obligations to report such breaches. It was impossible to keep this secret, and trying to do so would only make things exponentially worse when the truth inevitably came out. He moved immediately, his short legs carrying him across the room faster than he had moved in months. He caught up with the Neri woman just outside the door, gently but firmly guiding her further down the corridor, away from both the examination room and the viewing area. He could feel the gazes of both the human volunteer and the other doctors following them. Only when they were several doors down in a section of corridor that was mercifully empty did Vosix allow himself to snap.
Why?
He demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the translator's typically mild tone.
Were you there?
The Neri woman, still unnamed, he realized, looking genuinely distressed, her spots now a swirling mix of blues and grays that suggested fear and confusion. I told you, I was looking for the cultural exposition. The security personnel at that entrance didn't ask me anything. They just waved me through. I thought they were being friendly, maybe because I was early or something. I followed the crowd and ended up in that room.
Vosix felt his blood temperature rise, not quite anger, but the Rapelli equivalent of extreme frustration. He pulled up his communication interface and immediately contacted station security. The conversation that followed only made everything worse.
The Neri doctor?
The security officer said, confusion evident even through the communication link.
Dr. Zelnina. She never arrived. We've been waiting for her to check in for the past 40 minutes. We assumed she got caught in the station traffic. Oh, wait. You're saying someone else came through? Yes, Vosix said through clenched teeth. A Neri woman who is decidedly not a doctor. We just assumed she was Dr. Zelnina when we saw a Neri approaching. She matched the species profile, and the timing was close enough. She walked in with confidence, and we just... Oh.
The security officer's voice took on a distinctly worried tone.
Oh, that's bad.
Yes, Vosix agreed coldly.
That is very, extremely, catastrophically bad.
It was a total breach of contract with humanity. A violation of the confidentiality agreement that had taken weeks to negotiate, and Vosix, as lead doctor and primary liaison, would be the one responsible for fixing this without causing a diplomatic incident that could potentially damage humanity's integration into the galactic community. He ended the communication and turned back to the Neri woman, who was now looking at him with eyes that seemed on the verge of tears, though whether Neri actually cried, Vosix wasn't certain. The next 3 hours were a specific kind of hell that Vosix had never experienced in his career. He had dealt with contaminated samples, equipment failures, even a minor radiation leak once, but he had never had to manage the delicate combination of alien diplomacy, contract law, and damage control all at once.
Hey,
Sorry to interrupt your story and fall out of wherever I fell out of, but I just want to say really quick that I really do like this story, and I would love it even more. Hey, I know you. Yeah, you've been here before. Well, anyway, thanks for coming in again, but I would love it even more if you like this video and let them know about it. Because every time a video gets a like, a squirrel gets its nuts. Okay, I gotta go. Bye.
3 hours had passed since the examination had concluded, and now the human volunteer was sitting at a table in the food court of the space station, apparently enjoying something that the vendor had assured him was probably compatible with human digestive systems. Vosix had spent all of that time alternating between communicating with various legal departments and lecturing the Neri woman, whose name he had finally learned was Azel, about the magnitude of her mistake.
"Do you understand," he said for what felt like the 100th time, "how incredibly stupid it was to just wander into an examination room without checking where you were going, without verifying that you were in the right place, without even reading the signs on the doors?"
Azel had nodded miserably each time, her spots cycling through various shades of remorseful blue-gray.
"I'm looking at potential legal action here,"
Vosix had continued, his frustration making him more harsh than he typically allowed himself to be.
"A human could sue for breach of confidentiality. Humanity as a whole could file a complaint with the Galactic Council. This could impact their integration process, their trade negotiations, their entire relationship with the broader galactic community. And it's all because you couldn't be bothered to look at a door sign."
He pulled up his holographic displays of legal codes, contract clauses, and diplomatic protocols, making sure Azel understood every possible consequence.
"If this goes badly, if the human decides to pursue legal action, you will be named as a co-defendant. You will be financially responsible for a portion of any damages, and given that we're talking about potential breach of interspecies confidentiality agreements, those damages could be substantial."
Azel had gone very quiet at that point, her spots fading to an almost pure gray that Vosix's knowledge of Neri physiology suggested indicated genuine terror. "I don't have those kinds of credits," she whispered. "I'm just a cultural studies graduate student. I came to see the exposition because I'm writing my thesis on first contact artistic representations. I can barely afford my station quarters. A lawsuit I'd be in debt for the rest of my life." She looked up at him, her yellow eyes wide and pleading. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll explain what happened. I'll apologize. I'll do my best to make this right. Just please don't let this destroy my entire future over an honest mistake." Vosix had felt some of his anger cooling at that. She was young, he realized, probably not much older than some of his graduate students back at the Research Institute, and it had been an honest mistake, however monumentally stupid.
"You'll have to convince the human," Vosix said finally, his tone softening. "Not me. You need to explain what happened, apologize sincerely, and hope that they're understanding about your situation. If you can convince them not to pursue legal action, then maybe we can resolve this without it destroying both our careers."
"I'll do my best," Azel had promised, her voice small but determined. "I swear I will. I'll be completely honest and apologetic. I'll make him understand it wasn't malicious." Now, as they approached the human's table in the food court, Vosix felt his stomach churning. This was it, the moment that would determine whether this incident became a minor footnote or a major diplomatic crisis. When they were standing close to the human's table, Vosix broke the silence immediately. Better to control the narrative than let confusion fester.
"Mr. Brown,"
he began, using the human's surname as the briefing materials had indicated was appropriate.
"I need to explain something important about what occurred during your examination."
The human, David Brown according to his file, looked up from his meal, his face showing curiosity instead of concern. "Oh,
Hey, Doc. Something wrong with the results?
No, the medical data is all fine,
Vosix assured him quickly.
This is about a different matter. There was a mistake with our security systems, a failure in our access control.
He took what he had hoped was a calming breath.
During your examination, there was an unauthorized person present in the observation room.
He gestured to Azel, who stood slightly behind him, her spots now cycling through nervous yellows and oranges.
This is Azel. She's not a medical professional. She was supposed to be attending a cultural exposition elsewhere in the station, but due to a security error, she was mistakenly allowed into the examination room. She was present for approximately... how long were you there?
Maybe 2 minutes, Azel offered quietly. Before the doctor noticed me.
2 minutes, Vosix confirmed. This represents a breach of the confidentiality agreement we established with you. I want to be completely transparent about what happened, how it happened, and what we're doing to ensure it never happens again.
The human's expression had shifted from curious to confused.
So,
that one isn't a doctor. He was looking at Azel now, and Vosix noticed her spot shifting to an even brighter, nervous yellow.
No, Vosix confirmed. She is not. And I want to assure you that we take this breach very seriously. We've already implemented new security procedures. We've disciplined the security personnel involved, and we've transferred 50,000 additional credits to your account as compensation for this violation of your privacy.
The human blinked. 50,000 credits for a 2-minute mistake.
The confidentiality agreement you signed specified severe penalties for any breach,
Vosix explained.
This is the baseline compensation outlined in the contract. If you feel it's insufficient, given the circumstances, we're prepared to negotiate.
No, that's not what I meant, the human interrupted, waving his hands in a gesture that Vosix's translator indicated meant negation or dismissal. I just meant, that's a lot of credits for... He paused, then looked at Azel. What exactly did you see in those 2 minutes? Vosix tapped Azel's shoulder, urging her to speak, to apologize, to explain herself properly. This was her chance to make things right. Azel opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. When words finally came out, they were halting and uncertain. I'm sorry for seeing your... She paused, clearly struggling. Why is it so large? The silence that followed her statement was absolute. Vosix felt something inside his chest that might have been his heart stopping. Of all the things she could have said, of all the possible ways to apologize for a breach of confidentiality, she had somehow managed to find the worst possible phrasing. He was cursing inside, running through every repelly profanity he knew, and several he was fairly certain he was venting on the spot. This was it. This was how his career ended, with a socially inept graduate student who couldn't even apologize properly, creating an interspecies incident that would be taught as a cautionary tale for generations. The tense moment stretched out, each second feeling like an hour. Vosix prepared himself for anger, for outrage, for demands to speak to supervisors and lawyers and the Galactic Council itself. Then, the human burst out laughing. It wasn't polite laughter or nervous laughter. It was deep, genuine belly laughter that made his entire body shake. He laughed so hard that other patrons in the food court turned to look and kept laughing until tears formed in his eyes. 50,000 credits, he finally managed to say between gasps of laughter. As compensation because the cute alien lady made a mistake and said I was too... She said I was too large. He dissolved into laughter again.
That's the most hilariously absurd thing I've ever heard. Vozek stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't in any of the diplomatic scenarios he had prepared for. The human wiped his eyes and grinned at both of them. I'm not going to sue anybody. Are you kidding? This is amazing. This is such a good story to tell my friends back home that they probably won't even believe me. Yeah, so I got examined by alien doctors, and this random alien girl accidentally wandered in and made an awkward comment, and they paid me 50,000 credits to apologize. Nobody's going to believe that actually happened. He looked directly at Azelle, his grin widening. I'm genuinely happy this happened. Thank you for the extra credits. Honestly, this is the best part of my whole trip to space so far. Vozix and Azelle exchanged glances, both of them clearly struggling to understand what was happening. Azelle's spots had shifted to a confused pink color that Vozix had never seen documented in any Neri physiology text. You really don't blame me? Azelle asked, her voice small and uncertain. Blame you? The human shook his head. You made an honest mistake. Plus, you seem nice. He paused, then added with what Vozix's translator indicated was a playful tone. I should probably buy you dinner to thank you for the extra credits, if you want. You know, to show there's no hard feelings. Vozix felt his mind struggling to process this very unusual development. In his decades of dealing with interspecies relations, he had never encountered a response quite like this. Humans, it seemed, had very different reactions to privacy violations than most species he'd worked with. Azelle seemed equally confused, her spots now cycling through colors so rapidly that they created an almost rainbow effect on her green skin. If it was today? She said, her voice uncertain. I mean, I still haven't found the cultural exposition, and it probably ended hours ago anyway, so, Perfect, the human said enthusiastically. There's supposed to be a really good restaurant on level 7 that serves food from, like, 20 different species. We could try a bunch of different things. Make an evening of it. What do you think?
That would be nice,
Azelle said, though she phrased it as a question, as if still unsure whether this was actually happening. The human stood up, already pulling up a holographic directory to find the restaurant. Great, let's go before they get too crowded. Oh, and I'm David, by the way. David Brown.
Azelle,
She said, her spots finally settling on a warm orange that Vozix recognized as pleased contentment.
Just Azelle. Neri really don't do family names the way some species do.
They began discussing the details, what time, which restaurant exactly, what kinds of food they each could eat with the easy comfort of two people who had just decided to spend an evening together. Vozix stood there, reluctant to accept that this matter had been solved so easily, watching as they made their plans.
Well, if everything is settled, he said slowly, I should probably return to my duties, unless there's anything else you need to discuss, Mr. Brown.
Nah, we're good, David said cheerfully. Look, thanks for being upfront about what happened, Doc. I appreciate the honesty. And just like that, they were walking away together, chatting about something related to human culture. Vozix stood in the middle of the food court, feeling as though he'd just witnessed something his brain couldn't quite categorize. It was now late in the station's night cycle, or what passed for night on a space station that operated on a standardized galactic clock rather than any natural day-night rhythm. Vozix had returned to his quarters, filed all the necessary reports, and convinced himself that the matter was truly resolved. Except he couldn't quite convince himself. Something nagged at him, some professional paranoia that wouldn't let him rest. What if the human changed his mind? What if Azelle said something else inappropriate and reignited the whole incident? What if they were somehow colluding to extract more compensation from the medical facility? That last thought was absurd, he knew, but he couldn't shake it. Which was why he found himself following the duo at a discreet distance as they made their way to the restaurant on level 7. His mind still couldn't quite compute that this was really happening,
that a major breach of confidentiality had been resolved with laughter and dinner plans. He tried to be discreet as he entered the restaurant several minutes after them, selecting a table that was distant from where they sat but still within earshot. The ambient noise of the restaurant, a pleasant mixture of various species conversations, the clinking of eating utensils adapted to different anatomies, and some kind of soothing background music provided cover for his presence. He ordered something at random from the menu, barely paying attention to whatever the server recommended, his focus entirely on the couple across the room. He was still worried about the threat of a lawsuit, that he was protecting the facility's interests by ensuring nothing went wrong. But as he sat there, nursing a beverage that tasted vaguely like fermented plant matter, he began to overhear snippets of their conversation, and it became clear that it was very different from what he had imagined. And that's when I realized, David was saying, his hands animated as he told some story, that I'd been trying to use the universal translator for my dog's barking. Spent a whole day thinking the device was broken before someone pointed out that dogs aren't exactly sapient. Azel's laugh rang out, clear and genuine. That's adorable. I'm so sad I missed the actual cultural exposition because of my mistake in entering the wrong door. But honestly, your stories from Earth are making up for my loss. I've learned more about human culture in the last hour than I probably would have from a formal presentation. She leaned forward, her response glowing with warm amber tones. Tell me more about these dogs. They sound fascinating. They continued talking, and Vosix found himself inadvertently learning quite a bit about Earth and human culture as he eavesdropped. David was an excellent storyteller, painting pictures of his home planet with vivid details and obvious affection. Later in the evening, Vosix caught another snippet of their conversation. They'd moved on to discussing their respective experiences with space travel, and David's tone had shifted to something more playful. I mean, it's only fair I got to see you too, David said with what Vosix's translator indicated was a teasing quality. You know, to even out the karma. Azel laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the restaurant. Such a shameless human, she said, though her tone was teasing rather than offended. Her spots had shifted to a color that Vosix was fairly certain indicated romantic interest, though he wasn't entirely sure. Is this shamelessness normal for your species, or are you an exception? David grinned. Well, you'd have to hang out with me a few more times to find out, wouldn't you? I suppose I would, Azel replied, and even from his distant table, Vosix could see her spots glowing brighter. The evening wore on, and Vosix found himself relaxing despite his initial paranoia. It became increasingly clear that this wasn't some elaborate scheme to extract more compensation. It was simply two people enjoying each other's company, sharing stories and laughter over dinner. The incident that had caused him so much stress had somehow transformed into what appeared to be the beginning of a genuine friendship. Eventually, he watched as they finished their meal and stood to leave, still talking and laughing together. David offered his arm in what Vosix assumed was a human gesture of politeness, and Azel took it without hesitation, her spots displaying colors of contentment and happiness. As they walked toward the exit together, Vosix finally accepted inside that the matter was indeed solved. There would be no lawsuit, no diplomatic incident, no career-ending disaster. Somehow, impossibly, everything had worked out. But as he sat there in the now quieter restaurant, finishing his own meal, a thought occurred to him. They had learned during the examination that humans were actually not weak at all. Their bone density, muscle structure, and particularly that remarkable digestive system suggested a species with unexpected resilience. The initial assessment had been completely wrong. But he never really got to learn what Azel had thought was too big in her original observation. The digestive system, the bone structure, something else entirely that he hadn't even considered. The question would probably bother him for weeks, Vosix realized. But as he paid his bill and prepared to return to his quarters, he found himself smiling despite the lingering mystery.
Sometimes, he supposed, the universe worked in ways that even experienced xenobiologists couldn't predict. And perhaps that was what made it so interesting.